How to Sew the Velvet Constellation by Amber Meggs. The kits are available in two beautiful colourways, Lagoon or Festoon, or use your own fabric to make this luxurious velvet quilt with matching cushion. How to make 8-at-a-Time HSTS. These will be used in both the quilt and the cushion, so I'm showing you the technique here. Take your fabric B, which is the Star Block HST Square B, and draw a diagonal line. I'm using an erasable pen, but you could use a pencil if you prefer, and draw it on the wrong side from one corner to the other. And then turn it round and draw another diagonal line from the opposite corners. So you've got two diagonal lines and they cross in the centre. Now place this right sides facing with your Star Block HST Square A. So you can see that's the velvet. I've placed it right sides up, and then I'm placing the drawn HST Square B on top with the drawn lines uppermost. Just rearrange it slightly so the raw edges match. And because we're using velvet, I'm putting this on my ironing mat and then pin it in all four corners. And this just holds it into place. So this is a slightly different method than if you're using normal just quilting weight fabric, because we need to secure it, and then pin them together in the centre. And then once you've pinned them in the centre, to hold everything in place, because you've got the velvet right sides up, so it might be a bit slippery, if you poke pins through the fabrics and into your mat, that holds it all in place. Once it's nicely held in place, you can then move the pins like this, and you can see I'm placing the pins either side of the diagonal lines. This holds everything nice and still. When working with velvet, you need to put extra pins in and also put them closer together. And if you do this, you'll find stitching with velvet really easy, but you do need to use more pins and place them closer together. And by anchoring the corners and anchoring the centre, you can make sure that everything doesn't slip whilst you're pinning. Once you've pinned down one set of diagonal lines, working from the centre again, push your pins in through the fabrics and into the mat. You can just do this on your ironing board. And then pin together. And by working from the centre out, you can make sure you don't have any wrinkles. I just found that if I just pinned it without anchoring the corners and pinning it this often, everything did shift a little bit. Don't worry, things will move. And as you're pinning and sewing, you will see that maybe the raw edges aren't lining up exactly, but don't worry about that, because I've compensated for that by giving you much bigger squares than you would normally use for doing these half square triangles, so that there's a lot of excess to trim so that you will have accurate HST. So don't worry if things start slipping. So now it's all pinned nicely into place. You now need to sew 1/4 of an inch either side of each of the diagonal lines. So you're sewing 4 lines in total. Now if you want, you can sew over the pins, but just sew very slowly and carefully, or take them out just as you get them. So you can see here, there's the 4 lines. And give that just a gentle press from the background fabric side, because it's much better to press not on the velvet but on the background fabric, and that will just iron out any wrinkles. Use a medium setting like the wool setting. Now you can trim, so place it on your cutting mat. I'm using a rotating cutting mat because it's just easier. You don't have to, you can just move your cutting mat. So first of all, cut between the 2 diagonal lines. This will actually be on the line that you drew. Because I've pressed mine, the line's disappeared. If you've still got yours, you'll see that. But whether you've got the line or not, just make sure you cut through the centre of those lines. And then don't move the fabric, move the board. If you've got a rotating mat, that's easier. If not, just move your cutting mat, or move around the table a bit. And then cut through the centre of the other set of diagonal lines. So just make sure that your ruler is running centrally between them. Now don't move anything, because we're going to do some more cutting. Now turn it round, and we're going to cut vertically from top to bottom through the centre. So make sure that your ruler is lined up at the centre where those two cuts cross, and the straight line on the ruler matches up with the straight line at the top, and cut centrally through. Again, don't move any of the fabric yet, but turn it around and then cut centrally again. Make sure the line at the top matches up and that the ruler is running right through the centre, and cut again. And you have now divided your two pieces of fabric into 8 triangles. So there's your 8 half square triangles. So now we need to press and trim them. So take one of the triangles and open it up, and then press the fabric towards the background fabric. If you finger press this first of all, just to make sure you've got a nice crease, and then press it, but try to keep your iron off the velvet. If you're using a medium temperature wool setting, it will be fine. It won't mark the velvet. Just don't keep it on there for too long. And then open up all of the triangles and press them in the same way to create these half square triangles. And then you'll have 8 of them that look like this. So you've got the velvet on the one side and the calico on the other side. Now we can trim them. So as I said, I've given you lots of extra fabric, so these are oversized because the velvet can move when you're cutting. So by making them oversized, you've got plenty of leeway if anything goes wrong. Now place the diagonal 45-degree line so it runs straight down the seam, and we're going to cut them into 4.5-inch squares. So make sure that the ruler is sort of centrally placed, so where you can see I've got a little bit of fabric on the right hand side and it's within the 4.5 inches on the left. Cut up the right and along the top. I always cut from left to right because it's stuck on when I do the top, because it stops me, saves me clipping off the edge of my ruler, but you can cut right to left. Then once you've done that, line up the 4.5 inch on that top, and then the 4.5 inch on the right. Make sure the diagonal line runs along the seam and everything's nice and square, and then trim the right hand side and the top. And you can see there's plenty of excess for trimming, which means you have now got an accurate 4.5 inch half square triangle. And then repeat that with all of the other half square triangles. This is what they will look like. So you've now got 8 nice, really neat ones. And obviously you'll use different fabrics depending on which part of your quilt or cushion you're making. So this is just showing you the method of how to make them. How to make 4-at-a-Time QSTs, which is quarter square triangles. So take one star block QST square B, and draw a diagonal line on the wrong side of it for one corner to the opposite corner, just like we did with the half square triangles. These squares are a different size to the half square triangles. So you're drawing a diagonal line from just one corner to the opposite corner, and just one line this time. Now take your QST square A. In the instructions it will tell you which to take and the colour and everything, but you always use A's and B's. Place that A square right sides up, so you've got the velvet on the top, and then place the B square right sides down on top, so that drawn diagonal line is on top, and then smooth it out so the raw edges meet, because they're exactly the same size, and then pin it together just like we did with the half square triangles. So push pins into each of the corners, and that will just anchor it whilst you're pinning it together. After a while, when working with velvet, you get used to this method that you do lots of pinning, and then it makes it easy to sew, because people often think that velvet's really tricky to sew, and it isn't, especially when you're using a polyester velvet like this. You just need to do some extra things like cutting your fabric extra size and then trimming it down, and anchoring pins and lots of pins. It's all about pinning and not pressing too hot, and other than that, stitching with velvet's exactly the same. So start from the centre and then pin all the way down, but I do find that pushing these pins in to anchor it really helps to keep things still. And then once you've done that, you can then push the pins in. I tried lots of different methods, and I tried just pinning them without anchoring, but I did find things moved. And although I've allowed extra fabric, it's if you can get them pinned together so that everything matches up now, it does make it a bit easier. So once you've pinned it all together, you sew 1/4 inch either side of that diagonal line, and it will look like this. So you can see the seam line better on the velvet, so I'm just showing you the other side. And then remember to give it a quick press. And then we're going to cut between the 2 diagonal lines. So place your ruler so it's running centrally between the 2 diagonal lines, and then cut along it. A rotary cutter is a much easier way to do this, but obviously if you haven't got that, you can use scissors, but it's easier to do with a rotary cutter. And now you've got 2 very big half square triangles. So place one on your ironing board, open it up, and then fold the seam allowance so it faces towards the background fabric, and then give it a quick press just to make sure it lays flat, but don't leave the iron on the velvet for too long. And then repeat that to press the other half square triangle. Now you need to repeat this to do exactly the same with the other 1/4 square triangle B and the 1/4 square triangle A. And then when you've done that, you will have 4 half square triangles in total. Big ones, but you will have 4 of them. So now we need to take one of them and mark it. Turn it so it's wrong sides up, like this, so you can see the seams on the top and it's facing towards the background fabric. And place your ruler going from one corner to the other so that it goes right through the middle of that seam. Make sure that the line on the ruler lines up with that seam, and then draw a diagonal line. If your velvet that you're using is dark, or the fabric, and you can't see the drawn line, then use a chalk pencil for this, because you need to be able to see this line. So you can see it runs straight through the seam. Now take your ironing board again, or your ironing mat, and take one of the other half square triangles, place that right sides up. Now place the one that you've drawn the line on right sides down on top, but make sure the 2 fabrics aren't on top of each other, so the velvet's on the calico and the calico's on the velvet. And then you've now got to match up this seam, so make sure you match up the raw edges all the way around. But the 2 seams need to match up. This is really important. So push a pin through the seam where that drawn line is, so it's exactly on the seam, and then just peel back the calico a little bit and make sure that pin comes out right on the seam on the half square triangle below. And then do the same about 1 inch to the left. This just helps to anchor it while you're sewing. If you've got these 3 pins, then it's nicely anchored. So push it in, and by doing this you can be certain that these seams will match up, and this will just give you a neater 1/4 square triangle. And then do the same about 1 inch to the right of the centre. So push the pin through the seam and then pull it out and make sure it goes through the seam below, and now you've got it anchored and you know that that seam's matching up. Once that's done, then smooth everything out. And I'm just going to place some pins just to the right of the drawn line above, just to hold it in place, because I know everything is in place now, and that will hold it before I place the proper anchoring pins, the diagonal pins in the ones on the seam. But just pin those together there to start with. Now the pins that you place to hold the seam in place, keep them in, but push a pin so it goes through, then you can take it out. So if you put your pin in through all the layers of fabric where the anchoring pin is, and then one in the centre, then you can take them out. And now you know that that seam matches up all the way along, and then you can just pin the 2 fabrics together, because the aim is to make sure that the centre seam matches up and that everything's running in a straight line. So obviously I'm showing you how to do this exactly as I did it, and I'm doing it a bit slowly so that but when you're making the quilt and the cushion, there's quite a few of these to make. So once you've done one and you've followed this method, you'll find it quite easy. But remember, the fabrics will be different depending on which block you're doing, but this is just the method that you will use throughout. And now stitch quarter of an inch either side of that drawn line, and it will look like this. You can see on mine, look, that the velvet is shifted a bit at the top and the bottom, and the raw edges don't match up anymore, and that doesn't matter because I have allowed for that. And then place your ruler centrally between those two lines and cut through the centre to make 2 triangles. But now, when you open them up, you can see it's a quarter square triangle and it matches exactly in the centre. So you've got 2 calico triangles at the top and bottom and 2 velvet ones on the right. And you can press that seam open or to one side, it's up to you. And there's the other one. So you've now made 2 quarter square triangles. And you repeat this process with the remaining 2 half square triangles you had that you made at the beginning. And then that gives you 4 quarter square triangles, and that's what you'll use for one star block. So obviously the other ones will be different colours. So now you just need to trim it, because as I said, I've made it oversized to do that. Now take your ruler and place the diagonal line so it runs down the centre, and then place it so that the 4 1/4 inch mark on your ruler goes exactly where in the centre where all those fabrics meet. So the diagonal line runs down the seam and the 4 1/4 inch mark is exactly on the centre. Once you've done that, trim the fabric up the right hand side and across the top. And again, remember, I work from left to right because otherwise I find I cut off the corner of my ruler, but you can work right to left. And then turn it round 180 degrees. And then take your ruler again and match it up on the bottom and the sides at the 8 1/2 inch mark. So the bottom is matched up and the left hand side is matched. You can pull the fabric slightly if you want to, because sometimes the velvet just jumps back in. If you want to get those points to match exactly on the corners of your ruler, just pull them slightly, keeping your hand on the ruler so nothing else shifts, because sometimes the velvet bounces back in, and that will helps you to get an exact size quarter square triangle. So that's one done. You have got a perfect 8 1/2 inch quarter square triangle. Repeat that to trim all of them. And now you've got 4 quarter square triangles that are exactly 8 1/2 inches made from the velvet and the calico together. So now we're ready for the next stage. We're going to make the velvet Constellation quilt, but start by cutting out the fabric. The fabric is all listed in the ingredients, or if you've bought the kit, you will have been sent exactly the right fabric you need. This is the fabric that I had for the festoon quilt colourway. If you've got the lagoon, the fabrics will be different, or if you're using your own fabric, obviously it'll be the fabric you've chosen. And there's some calico as well, so you've got the full velvets and calico, and again the measurements for these are listed in the instructions, and also some fabric for the binding, and I chose a stripe binding for this. So now you've got all your fabrics. With the velvet, you don't really need to press it. And with the calico, I would press it to remove any creases. So have a look at the fabrics and work out which one is which one is fabric 1, fabric 2, fabric 3 and fabric 4. And then cut them all out following the instructions that are in the measurements that are in the instructions, and label them. This is really important. They're all squares and it will be very difficult to remember which is which if you don't label them. So write out the name of the piece as I've listed in the cutting out instructions and pin them to them, because you've got lots of the same piece, 4 of one, 8 of another, or whatever. Then cut out the background fabric. So this is the calico fabric. Again, some of them there's quite a few pieces, so I've clipped them together, but do label them. You can photocopy the cutting out instructions if you want to cut them out, or just draw them onto a scrap of fabric. And then I've cut the binding fabric. There's strips here, and again the measurements are all in the instructions for this. Once you've cut them all out, then organise them into groups so that you put all of the pieces for star block 1 in one pile, all of the pieces for star block 2 in another pile, and all of the pieces for Star Block 3 in another pile. And if you do that, it makes it a lot easier, because then you're going to make one star block at a time, and if you've got all the fabrics together, it just makes it simpler. And then the calico fabric is used across all of the blocks, so you use a little bit of each for all of the blocks, so just keep them in a separate pile. And then organise the fabrics for your 2 chain blocks. So it's chain block 1, chain block 2, and then those are the background calico fabric that you use for the chain blocks, but you'll use some for each of them. And then these are all the pieces that are used for the borders. So you've got some velvet and you've got some calico, and these are used to border the quilt. Now we're going to start by making star block 1. So take all of the pieces, they're listed in the instructions, that you need to make star block 1. Just to make sure you've got everything. So you're going to need some of the calico. You'll need 2 star block HST square B. So take just 2 of them and put the others to one side. And then you've got the QST fabric A, and you'll need 4 of the QST B. So put the others to one side because you'll use those for the other star blocks. And then you've got 8 inner corner squares. You'll need to take 8 outer corner squares from the pile. But don't worry, all of this is listed in the instructions, so just follow them to take all the fabrics that you need. And then just put the others to one side so you know that you'll use them later. And then you've got 2 star block 1 centre squares as well, because we're going to make 2 of star block 1. Making the half square triangles and the quarter square triangles. Take 1 HST square A and 1 HST square B, and then follow the 8-at-a-time HST instructions that I showed you at the beginning of this video tutorial to make 8 HSTs, and don't forget to trim them to the exact size. And again, all of the details and measurements are listed in the instructions. And then you've got 8 HSTs. I'm using the festoon fabric here. If you're using Lagoon or you're using your own fabric, then the instructions and the diagrams will tell you which fabric to use. I've done them as fabric 1, fabric 2, fabric 3, fabric 4, so you can easily see which is which. Now follow the 4-at-a-time quarter square triangle instructions to make 4 quarter square triangles using the fabric pieces. So the 2 QST square A and the 2 QST square B. You've got the fabric that you've arranged here, there's enough to make the 2 blocks, but just start by making the pieces for 1 block and then make all the pieces for the other block. And then once that's done, there's your 4 quarter square triangles. So they're all ready now to put into the block when we're going to assemble it in a moment. Making the corner sections. So take all the pieces you've got for the corner sections. You'll need 1 inner corner square, 1 outer corner square, and 2 HSTs. So there's all the pieces that you'll need to make just 1 corner square. Put the others to one side for one moment. Now lay them, these 4 pieces, right sides up, as I'm showing you here in this arrangement, or there is a diagram in the instructions you can follow. So do it in that arrangement. So you've got outer corner squares, inner corner squares. Now take the 2 pieces in the top row. So that's the outer corner square and 1 half square triangle, and pin and sew them together. Now, because we're pinning velvet to calico, have the velvet on top. And the reason for this is because velvet likes to roll under. And when you have velvet underneath, the edge rolls under, and then you can sometimes mis-sew the seam or sew that rolled in. So put the velvet on top, and then it won't roll under because the calico stabilises it. Push pins through the very edge of the velvet and into the calico below, and that will stop the edges from rolling up at all. So if you put them right in the edge and place your pins about 1/2 to 3/4 inch apart, and then it will stay nice and still and you can sew them together. and then pin the 2 pieces together in the bottom row. So that's the half square triangle, the inner corner square. Now with this one, you are sewing 2 velvet pieces together. For the quilt and the cushion, I have tried as much as I can to reduce where you have to sew 2 pieces of velvet together, because obviously you get that rolling under. And there are a couple of seams where you have to do it, and this is one of them. So when you're sewing 2 velvets together, pin them at the either end to hold them in place. And I also put a pin a little bit down the side, and put your pins about 1/2 inch apart and place the point of the pin right close to the edge, and that just makes sure it all stays together. So you can see I've got lots of pins and they're very close to the edge. Sew those seams, and then that's the top row. Now you can press that seam open or to one side, it's up to you, and try and press from the wrong side. You can give it a little press from the right side, but again, do that fairly quickly and use your medium iron. But just make sure that the seams are flat. And then you can sew the top row to the bottom row. So place them right sides facing, and first of all, make sure the 2 seams match up by pushing a pin 1/4 inch down through the top seam, and make sure it goes into the bottom seam. And do that about 1/2 inch from the top and then at the top. And those 2 placement pins will make sure that seam matches up when you sew it together. And then pin them together at either end. And then I like to put a pin down the side, and it just holds everything still. And again, push the pins through the fabrics into the mat to hold them in place before you pin them. Again, I'm putting another pin down the right hand side, and you'll see whenever I do sew the velvet for the quilt, I always use this method of putting the point of the pin really close to the edge, like less than 1/8 of an inch, and that just stops the velvet from moving. And then you can just simply lift the pins up. You don't even need to take them out, just take them out of the mat. Where you've pushed those placement pins to match the seam, pin the fabric together, either side of the pin, and then you can remove the placement pin. You can push it, you can make your pin diagonal or horizontal, and then I'm just putting the pins in through the fabric. So now I've pinned it together all the way along, and the seam matches. You can sew that together. And that's 1 corner square. Now repeat this process to make 3 identical ones. Give them a little press. I like to press it a little bit from the right side because it just helps it to lay flatter, because the velvet obviously isn't as flat. So take all of the other pieces, all of the half square triangles, the inner corner squares, the outer corner squares, to make 4 identical corner sections. They look like they're not identical in the block, but that's because they're rotated. But now you're ready to start assembling the block. Assembling the star block. So if you refer to the block diagram that's in the instructions, you need to place the 4 corner sections, the 4 quarter square triangles, and the centre square. So you just need one of those. Put the other one to one side for a moment for the other block. And place them all right sides up. In this arrangement, or if you have a look in the instructions, there's a diagram which probably is easier to follow. So you've got a corner square in each corner. Remember, you will need to rotate them. So it's really important that you follow the diagram, because you do have to rotate the corner sections. And also the quarter square triangles that go on the sides, they're rotated as well. With the centre square, this one I made sure with my blocks that it smoothed down. Although the block is symmetrical, I decided with the centre square, when I'm sewing it together, I would have the velvet running down. With all of the other velvet, I wouldn't worry too much about pile direction, because when you're making things like half square triangles and rotating blocks, the piles will be moving around anyway. It was just the centre squares I decided I'd have the pile running that way. Once you've laid everything right sides up, and you double check to make sure you've got everything the right way round, then you can pile them up. So I'm just going to pile up the bottom row so that they're in order, and then the centre row, just easier to pin together if you've piled them up, and then the top row. So now you need to pin them together. So there's the first corner square from the top row, and there's the quarter square triangle. Place them right sides facing. and pin them together. So again, always pin at the corners first, and then pin a little bit of the way down on the side, and that just keeps it stable. Now, the wonderful thing about sewing with velvet, although it does have problems like having to do lots of pins, the great thing is it's very forgiving. It's not a stretch velvet, but it has a bit more ease in it than a cotton fabric. So it means that once you've anchored it at either end, you can pull it very slightly. And if any of your seam allowances aren't 100% correct, or you've cut it slightly wrong, or the velvet has moved, you can pull it to fit exactly. It won't cause any puckers. Obviously, you wouldn't want to pull it loads, and if your seam allowances are really wrong and you've cut really wrong, then I wouldn't advise this. But when you're getting two pieces to fit together, the velvet is very forgiving. It's not a stretch velvet, and I wouldn't recommend using a stretch velvet for this quilt. You need to have a proper stable velvet. But because it is a little bit more forgiving, it's so much easier to get patchwork pieces to fit. Again, put the point of your pins really close to the edge before you sew them together, particularly on this piece because you've got two velvets that you're sewing together and you don't want the edges to roll under. Sew that one together and then sew the other one. So that's the top row sewn. There's the middle row sewn, and there's the bottom row sewn. And once you've sewn the rows individually, you can then sew the rows together. Again, right sides facing. Pin them together. I would start by making sure that those seams match up on the centre square and that quarter square triangle. So just push your pin through the seam on the top one and through the seam on the bottom one. I do that about ½ inch down and then just from the top, and that means that the area that I will be stitching will be between where these two pins are, so that you know that the seam is in the right place. And then push a pin, obviously like we did before, either side of those placement pins, and you now know they match up. And then repeat that to join up these. You will find when you make the whole quilt that not every one of your seams will match up exactly, and it really doesn't matter. But if you do take the time to match up seams like this as you're doing it, then you'll have a greater chance. And it will look more even. If you just sew this strip together without matching up these seams first, they probably wouldn't match up. So don't worry if everything doesn't match up perfectly, but if you just put a little bit of time into matching seams, then it will be near enough. And then once you've matched up the seams, pin it together at the end, and then pin between. I find that when I'm doing this, if I anchor the seam by just pushing a pin through, then I can pull it on the left-hand side, and then that just makes sure that everything fits exactly. And when you're doing this, make sure that the seams stay either pressed to one side or open, the ones where you've done the half square triangles or you've joined the corner squares. Whichever way you've pressed them, make sure that they're still pressed that way, otherwise you'll have twisted seams. It doesn't matter, you'll have the odd twisted seam, it's sort of unavoidable, but try to avoid that because it just gives you a flatter finish. And then pin that together all the way along and then sew it together. And then when you've done that, sew the bottom row below the middle row. And then it will look like this. And this is 1 star block 1. You can see all my seams are either pressed over to one side or open. So you've done 1 star block 1. Repeat this all over again to make another identical star block 1, because you'll have 2 in your quilt. And then put them to one side, ready to make the next blocks before assembly. Making star block 2. So take all of the pieces that you've labelled for star block 2. So you'll have HST square A, you'll need the HST square B, 2 of them, QST square A and QST square B. And remember, all of this, I would just follow the instructions for this because it will tell you exactly what pieces you need. And because you've labelled everything, it's a lot easier. You've got outer corner squares, inner corner squares and centre squares. Now, Star Block 2 is made in exactly the same as Star Block 1, but just using different fabrics. The construction is the same. You have to make half square triangles. Remember to follow the instructions right at the beginning that show you how to make the half square triangles. So you've got 8 here. And they'll also tell you how to make the quarter square triangles. So the process is the same, it's just that the fabrics are different, but it's all detailed in the instructions. And because you've labelled all your fabric when cutting out, you'll know which fabric is which. So here's the fabrics that we're going to use to make the quarter square triangles. So you use A and B fabric. If you need a refresher, just go back to the video at the beginning that shows you how to make these quarter square triangles. Here they are, all trimmed. I've got 4 of them. And then you need to make the corner squares. Now obviously you're going to be making 2 of this Star Block 2, just like you made 2 of the Star Block 1. So now you understand the process. If you want, you can do the 2 at the same time, so you can make like 8 quarter square triangles and 16 half square triangles and make all of the 8 corner blocks. Or you can just do like I did with Star Block 1 and make 1 whole block at a time. But I found it just a bit quicker to do all of the different sections for both blocks. So there's all the corner squares. You need 4 of them. Or if you're making both blocks at the same time, then make 8 of them. But it's entirely up to you. It depends what process you prefer. Once you've done that, lay out all of the pieces that you've got. The diagram in the instructions will show you what I'm showing you here, where you've got them, but with the correct fabric numbers on them. Then put the centre square again. I'm making sure the pile of mine goes down, but I think it's quite nice, particularly with a patchwork quilt, to have the piles facing in different directions, because the light falls on them differently and they change colour a bit. And I think that's the beauty of the patchwork quilt and using the velvet, is the calico stays still in one colour and the velvet shimmers and changes colour with the light. So I wouldn't worry too much about pile direction. Sew the rows together, so the top row, the middle row, and then the bottom row. And then once you've done that, sew all the rows together, and that is 1 Star Block 2 complete. And then repeat that to make another identical Star Block 2. So that's all your 2 Star Block 2s done. Again, put those to one side for later. Making Star Block 3. There's only 1 Star Block 3 in the quilt, that's put in the centre. So take all of the pieces, that's all the pieces you've got left over for the Star Blocks now. All the Star Block 3 pieces, the velvet ones, and then that will be all the rest of the Star Block calico pieces. So you'll have HST squares A and B, QST squares A and B, inner corner squares, outer corner squares and centre squares. So start by making the QSTs, following the instructions at the beginning if you need a reminder, and the HSTs. So here's the 8 HSTs, all made and trimmed. So just pop them to one side and then make the QSTs. Do make sure that you've labelled these fabrics, because the QST squares are a different size to the HST squares, and it's important that you use the right ones or they won't work. But if you've labelled everything at the beginning, then you'll be absolutely fine. So there's the 4 QSTs. So you can see that the colours are changing throughout the blocks, but again, all of this is listed in the instructions. That just gives you the varied look. When you've done that, you can then make the 4 corner squares. There is a diagram in the instructions that shows you the layout, so you can use the diagram for that. But there's also quilt layout diagrams. And if you're using one of the kits, so the festoon or the lagoon colourway, the layout diagrams will show you all of this in colour. So you might find it easier to follow that, because it's very simple then to see which bit goes where in the right colour. If you're using your own fabric, you can still use those diagrams, but you'll just need to remember which fabric's which. So there's the 4 corner squares complete. And now you can start assembling the block. The block is assembled in exactly the same way as block 1 and block 2. Exactly the same layout, it's just that the fabrics are different. Remember to rotate the corner blocks so that you've got those inner corner squares on the inside each time. And then you'll notice that when you put the QSTs in, that they create a diamond shape in the centre around that square. So you can see, because the calico, you can see the diamond shape forming. So that's the middle row. But once you lay it out, I always have an extra check, because it's really annoying if you have to unpick it. But actually, unpicking velvet is fine. It doesn't mark. You just have to remove all the loose threads and sew it again. But try to avoid that by making sure everything's laid out correctly. Once that's done, sew the rows together one by one, and then sew the rows to create the block. So that is star block 3 complete. And you've now made all of the 5 star blocks ready to put in your quilt when we come to assembling it. Making chain block 1. We're going to start by making the corner sections for it. So take all of the pieces that you've labelled for chain block 1. So some of these pieces will be velvet, some will be calico. So take out the pieces you need, because the background fabric, the calico fabric, is used in both chain blocks. So you'll just need to take the pieces. But if you read the instructions, what you need is listed in there. So to start by making the corner sections, you need a chain block 1 square A, 1 square B and 2 square C. So the A and the B are the velvet squares and the C are the calico squares. Put all of the others to one side and put the labels back on so you remember which is which. So we're just going to make one corner section. Lay the corner section out like this in order. The diagram again is in the instructions. So lay it out in order so you've got 4 squares. You can see that the velvets are diagonal and the calicos are diagonal. And then sew the 2 fabrics together in the top row and the 2 fabrics together in the bottom row. Once that's done, they'll look like this. And again, press the seams either open or to one side. It's entirely up to you. Sometimes I find the velvet chooses which way it wants to go. And then place the top row right sides facing with the bottom row. And as we've done with all of the others, pin the seams together first by putting a pin about 1 inch down from the top through the seam into the bottom seam, and the nether pin about 1/8 of an inch from the top, and that anchors them. Pin them together at either end, and again put that side pin in. I like to do the side pin a bit further down with velvet. It just, again, anything that you can do to stop it moving just makes the sewing easier. What you don't want to be doing is, while you're sewing, is adjusting things. You want to have pinned it lots so you can just pop it under the machine and sew it easily. So I'm just putting pins across where those seams are. And then again, remember that you must put the pins really close to the edge, and that stops the velvet from rolling. Because the aim is that the raw edges always match up while you're sewing, and these extra pins will make sure this happens. Otherwise, the velvet can move a little bit and the raw edges don't match up. But it's easily overcome by this extra pinning. So once I've pushed the placement pins in, and then just pull them out and push them through the fabric, and then sew the 2 rows together. And then this creates 1 corner section. So give it a little press. And then repeat that to make 4 identical corner sections. Assembling the chain block. So take all the pieces. You've got the centre square, the chain block sides and the corner sections, and we'll start by putting the top row together. The top row has a corner section, a chain block side and a corner section. You can see here that the corner sections are rotated, and if you follow the layout diagram in the instructions or the block diagram, then you can see how these are rotated and which order they're in. I've done a block diagram for them, but also the layout diagram shows you the colours. Then the middle row has got a chain block side, the chain block one centre, and another chain block side. So you can see that this chain block is a lot simpler than the star blocks because you haven't got any half square triangles, quarter square triangles, they're just big squares, and obviously the pieced corner sections. And then the bottom row, you've got a corner section, a chain block side, and another corner section. And again, just double check after you've laid them out that it looks like the diagram and that you've turned those corner sections round so that all the 4 fabrics that are next to the centre are the same and the 4 fabrics on the outside are the same. So there's the top row all joined together, there's the middle row joined together, and then the bottom row joined together. And then all you need to do is join those 3 rows together. Make sure you match up the seams first, and then pin the outsides before you pin all the way across, and then join the bottom row on in the same way. Again, match up this, pin the seams together first, then the outer edges, and then pin between. And that's chain block 1 finished. Now you need to make another identical chain block 1 because there are 2 in the quilt. And it's exactly the same, the layout's exactly the same, so just make sure you've got your corner sections rotated properly so that the same fabrics are on this centre and the same on the outside, and then put these to one side so that we can then start making chain block 2. Making chain block 2. There are 2 chain block 2 in the quilt, so take out all the pieces that you've got labelled for this. You'll have the velvet chain block 2 pieces and the calico chain block pieces. Now these are made in exactly the same way as chain block 1, it's just all the fabrics are swapped around. So we're going to start by making the corner sections, and again refer to the diagram in the instructions, or if you prefer just use the whole quilt layout diagram and then you can see what fabrics go where. But you can see from this layout here that the corner section is the same, made in the same way as chain block 1, it's just that the fabrics are swapped round. So sew the 2 together in the top row and the 2 together in the bottom row, keeping the velvet on top because it stops it from rolling under. And once you've sewn the top row together and the bottom row together, then sew the top row to the bottom row. I'm just going to twist that round so it's in the right place. And then pin it together so that the centre seam matches and then the side edges match, and then pin it together across the top. Sew this together and that makes 1 corner section. So repeat that to make 4 identical corner sections. And then once you've done that, you can then start to assemble the block. And the block is assembled as before, so you're getting used to this now. You've realised it's quite simple. It's just about rotating fabrics and using the correct fabric. So in the top row, you've got a corner section, a chain block side and a corner section. So join all of those together. And then in the middle row, you've got a chain block side, a centre square, and another chain block side. So join those 3 together, and then in the bottom row you've got a corner section, a centre square, a side square and a corner section. And again, make sure that the corner sections are rotated so that you've got the same fabrics that are in the centre of the block and the same fabrics in the corner of the block. And then join all the pieces together in the top row, and then there's all the pieces joined together in the middle row and all the pieces joined together in the bottom row. And then all you need to do is sew the 3 rows together, one below the other, making sure you match up those centre seams and then match up the side edges. And then this is chain block 2 complete. So you can see that kind of alternating colours of squares. And then repeat this, I'll just fold that up and put it to one side. Repeat this to make another identical chain block 2. So you can see all the colours of the velvets are alternating. And then put that to one side. You've now completed all the blocks for your quilt, so we can start joining the whole thing together. Making the quilt top. Now you've made all the blocks, you need to lay them all out on a flat surface and refer to the quilt layout diagram for positioning. So you can see where everything goes if you're making the festoon or the lagoon colourway, or if you're using your own fabrics, then you'll be able to tell from the fabric numbers what to place where. So start by placing the 3 blocks in the top row together and sew those together. Then take the 3 blocks in the second row. So in the middle row, you've got chain block 2, star block 3 in the centre, and chain block 2 on the right. When you pin them all together, make sure that you match up the seams exactly by pushing pins through vertically, just like we've done before, and then pinning across the seams. If you make sure all these seams match up, you'll get a much neater finish. And then for the bottom row, you've got star block 2 on the left. Then you've got chain block 1 in the centre of that row. And again, remember to match up all the seams. And then you've got star block 1 on the right hand side of that row. So sew all of these together to make all 3 rows. And then it will look like this. So there's the first row all sewn together. It's easier if you have a look at the quilt layout diagram, because it's hard for me to show you here the whole layout as it's too big. And then I've joined together the middle row. You can see I've got all of my seams matching up, and I've pressed the seams. It doesn't matter whether you press them open to all one side, it's up to you. And here's the bottom row. So I've now got 3 really long rows. So remember which row is which by just checking again against the layout diagram to be sure. And then you can sew all of these rows together, one below the other. And you'll see that that chain pattern that's created by the chain blocks starts to make sense, because you can see that those colours are alternating of the squares, and it creates the chain effect that goes throughout the quilt. And then when you've joined row 1 and 2 together, so the top row and the middle row, then join the bottom row. The next thing you need to do is make the borders, and these go around the edge of the quilt just to finish it off, and also to continue with the chain pattern, and it gives just quite nice edging to the quilt. So if you have a look at the instructions, they will tell you what pieces go in which piece. So you've got border short strips, border long strips, and you've got border squares in 3 different colours of velvet. So have a look at all the strips, and you can see, well, you've labelled them all when you cut them out, so you know which are the long strips and the short strips. And they've been designed in such a way so that when they're joined to the quilt, they continue that chain pattern. So it's important that you make sure that you follow those instructions exactly to put the right border squares in the right place, and the short strips and the long strips. And then when you join them on, everything will be in place. So I'm going to start by making the top border. So you start off with a border short strip. I'll just take one away for now. Border short strip. Then you put a border square A, sew that right side's facing. Then you attach a border long strip to the other side of the border square A. Then take another border square A and sew that to the end of the border long strip. And then sew a border short strip on the end. Make sure you sew everything right sides together. And this is what the top border will look like when it's all joined together. And then repeat that to make the bottom border, it's identical. So just copy that, or it says in the instructions how to do it, but just copy that, because the bottom border is exactly the same as the top border. Then take your quilt and sew the top border right sides facing along the top. And when you pin it into place, this is quite easy to sew and pin because it's mostly just the calico. You'll see that the border squares will join in with the chain effect to continue it into the border, so it gives quite a nice finish. And then sew the bottom border to the bottom. So there you see I've sewn the top border to the top of the quilt, and you can see that chain is running now into the border and the colours are alternating. And then when you've done that, sew the bottom border to the bottom edge, and it will look like this. And again, you can see that the chain is running into the border, so it just gives it a quite nice finish. And having the calico edge also makes it a lot easier when you come to layer your quilt and bind it. So to make the side borders, again, this is all listed in the instructions and it tells you what order to put everything in. So you're using short strips, long strips, border square Bs and border square Cs. So lay it all out. I followed the instructions and laid it out and pinned them as I was doing it. So you can see you've got the short strip, then you've got a border square and a long strip. So these are the same length as the top and bottom borders, they just have a border square on the ends. And then you can see they're alternating. Do make sure that you follow the instructions so that you get the right border squares in the right place to continue that chain effect. So this is one side border. I've joined it all together, and you join this so that you've got one row, so you've got everything below each other rather than in a line, only because they're sewn onto the sides. And then repeat that to make the left side border, so the right side border and the left side border are identical, and then sew them to the sides of the quilt. And you'll see that you've got the border squares go in the corners, and you've got the same colour border squares in each of the four corners. And then when you sew them into place, the chain effect will continue into this side border as well. And then sew the left side border to the other side. And then when it's finished, I've laid it out on my kitchen floor so you can see it. It was the best place I could find to lay out the whole quilt so I could show you what it looked like. Obviously, you've got the layout diagram, but I thought you'd like to see what it looks like before it's all quilted and finished. So there we are. We're now ready to complete the quilt. Finishing the quilt. So I've quilted mine now. I've backed mine with a fleece because it's nice and soft and warm, and then quilted along the diagonal lines and also some squares in the centre. You can use a normal wadding and cotton quilt backing if you prefer. I just like the look of the fleece, and it's really easy to do and gives a nice easy finish, and you don't need to use an extra wadding, you just use the fleece. So draw the lines on your quilting lines using like an erasable pen, and then just quilt along in whatever pattern you choose. I've just done in my diagonal lines with the squares in the centre of the large squares, and I used a variegated thread for this. So do whichever pattern you prefer, or just go geometric. Once you've done that, you can then bind it. Don't forget to cut the selvages off the binding strips, because you don't want those. You want nice neat edges. And then take two of your binding strips and join them together diagonally. So what you do is, because I've cut mine strips in half, so I'm just opening them out because I cut them across the width of the fabric. Place two of the strips right sides facing, just making sure the top and the top edge matches up. Just make a little mark so that you can see where the bottom edge is, and then draw a diagonal line from the top corner to the bottom corner. It's just that you want an exact, so that you're turning it into a square with a diagonal line. And then place this binding strip right sides facing with the other one at right angles like this, making sure the top and the side wall edges match up. If you want more detailed instructions about binding, if you go to the Amber Makes website, then there is a free PDF download as well as a full video tutorial where I go into joining binding, attaching binding, doing single fold, double fold, how to join the strips like this, but also how to join strips when it's done. So if you want more detail, which will help you work out measurements for your own quilts as well, then go onto the Amber Makes website and you can use that. Now I'm using a double fold binding for this quilt, so once I've joined all the strips together, I've folded them in half, wrong sides facing, and pressed them so that they're double fold. And then because I'm going to machine top stitch mine in place, I'm going to sew the binding on the wrong side. So this is the fleece backing side. So measure about halfway down one side and then measure 4 inches below that, and that's where you're going to start sewing. So take your binding strip and match up the raw edge of the binding to the raw edge of the quilt. Put the top at the centre. So you can see I've folded it in half because it's a double fold. Put the top at the centre and just pin it into place. That's just to hold it. And then pin it into place at that 4 inch and start sewing at the 4 inch, and then you've got 4 inches unstitched, and you need this excess for when you're joining the two ends, because when you stop and when you've sewn all the way around and mitered the corners, you stop at the other side. But again, if you have a look at the special, it's called How to Bind a Quilt, I go into this in a lot more detail. So if you've never done binding before, follow that, because I also show you in the PDF instructions and the tutorial how to miter corners and how to join your binding as well. So once you've sewn it all the way around the edge and mitered the corners, it will look like this. So all you need to do now is fold it over to the right side of the quilt. I like to do mine like this because I am going to top stitch it in place, and you get a neater finish if you do it this way. If you're going to hand stitch the binding in place, then sew it the other way around by sewing it to the right side and turning it over to the wrong side. So once you've done that, turn the binding over. Make sure it just covers the line of stitching that you've just done. Just because you don't want that line, that seam to show, but you don't want it to go too far. And because you've cut the binding the width that it needs to be, plus a little bit extra, that gives you enough so that it will go around the bulk of the quilt. So make sure it just covers that line of machine stitching, and then pin it into place all the way around. Fold those corners at an angle and then back over, and you'll get a nice neat mitered corner. But again, instructions for doing that are in the tutorial and the free PDF download. So pin it into place. All the way around the edge, and then once that's done, you can then top stitch all the way close to the edge, all the way around, and then that finishes the binding, and it will look like this. So you can see you've got that lovely nice stripe binding. I think because the quilt is very geometric and solid colours, I think the little stripe binding just gives a nice finishing touch to the edge of it and a little bit of interest. Your beautiful quilt is finished. Making the velvet Constellation cushion. So this is the cushion that matches the quilt. We're going to start by cutting out the fabric. So cut out all the fabrics that are listed in the ingredients and label them. Either write the labels that I've put in the cutting out list onto a piece of paper, or you can photocopy it and cut it out, but do label each of them because there are several of each piece, and it's really important that you remember which piece is for which, and that you also cut the correct fabrics. There are 3 velvet fabrics and a calico background fabric used in the cushion. I'm showing you it here in the Lagoon colourway, but whether you're making the festoon colourway or using your own fabric, the method is exactly the same and you use the same instructions. So I'm sorting them here into groups. So I've got my HST pairs, my QST fabrics, the centre square, and then the corner sections and the back as well. We'll start by making the cushion front. And for this we need to make the half square triangles and the quarter square triangles. So take the 2 pieces of fabric for the half square triangles, which is HST square A and HST square B. Follow the instructions, the beginning of the instructions, or the beginning of this tutorial that shows you how to make 8-at-a-time HSTs. In that tutorial, it explains about using square A and square B. The colours are different in the tutorial because they're generic to the whole set of instructions, but just follow them to make your 8 half square triangles. Then take your 2 QST square A squares and your 2 QST square B, that's the calico. Then follow the QST quarter square triangle tutorial at the beginning of this tutorial and follow that exactly because you need to make 4 quarter square triangles. Once you've done that, they will look like this. Obviously, if you're using their festoon colourway or your own fabric, the colours will be different, but the shapes and the fabrics and all the pieces will be exactly the same. So that's the half square triangles and the quarter square triangles all finished. Making the corner sections. So the cushion cover front has 4 corner sections and they're all made in the same way. So to make one corner section, you need to take 1 inner corner square, 1 outer corner square and 2 of your HSTs. Put the others to one side for the moment. Now lay these 4 pieces right sides up in this arrangement, or if you have a look in the instructions, there's a diagram that shows you this arrangement, and you can also look at the cushion layout diagram which shows it coloured in as well. So place the 2 pieces in the top row right sides facing and sew them together. Make sure you pin them first and then sew them together, and then they will look like this. Then place the top row right sides facing on top of the bottom row and sew them together. I've gone into more, if you're only making the cushion and haven't watched the quilt tutorial, then do have a look at making Star Block 1 quilt tutorial, because I go into this in more detail and talk about the pinning and how to pin right on the edge. So if you're only making the cushion, then do watch the Making Star Block 1 tutorial in the quilt section, because the star block is made in exactly the same way as the cushion front, and you'll just get some more detail there about all the pinning. So match the seams by pushing placement pins through the top seam and into the bottom seam, and then match the left hand side, push a pin through into your mat and then pin them together a little bit further down, and this just keeps those side edges straight while you're sewing. And then making sure the raw edges match up. I like to push pins through the 2 fabrics and into my ironing board and then pin them together. It just helps to stop the velvet from slipping. If you pin them together where you've got your pins laying horizontally in the normal way, the velvet can slip a bit. So this just makes it extra secure. And then pin them together on the right hand side and then further down. So you pin the 2 side edges together and then pin together at the top. If you anchor the 2 fabrics with your pin into your board, you can then just pull them very gently and they'll match up, because especially with the velvet, it's quite bouncy and it can go reduce or a little bit. So sometimes you just need to pull them to match up. Make sure that you push the point of the pins right into the edge of the velvet, and that stops the edges from rolling under. Sew these together and then you've got 1 corner section. You can press that seam open or to one side, it's entirely up to you. Now repeat that to make 4 identical corner sections using the remaining of the fabric pieces that you've put aside for the corner sections. And then that's the corner sections complete, ready for assembly. Assembling the cushion front. We're now going to put all the pieces together to create the star that will be the cushion front. So take all your corner sections, the quarter square triangles and the centre square. Now following the cushion layout diagram that's in the instructions, or as I'm showing you here, you need to join all the pieces together. So start by doing the top row. You've got 1 corner section, 1 quarter square triangles. You need to make sure you rotate them so they look like the diagram, so that you create that lovely star block. And then pin them right sides together, each piece. Make sure you pin just as I've shown you before to match up seams, and make sure that when you've got the 2 velvets together you pin them so they don't roll, they roll under. Then take the middle row that has a quarter square triangle, a centre square and another quarter square triangle. So again, follow the diagram. What I do is I lay out all of the rows. I look at the diagram, I look at it again and make sure everything's correct, because you can see when it's all joined together it creates almost a diamond within a star at the bottom. Then for the bottom row, take another corner square, a corner section, then take a quarter square triangle and another corner section, and again make sure that those inner squares are on the inside. but just look at the diagram and you'll have it all around the right way. And then pin lots and sew together. Now you've got the top row, and there's the middle row, and then there's the bottom row. Just turn that round, so make sure it's the right way around. Everything's symmetrical anyway. And then pin the top row, the bottom of the top row to the top of the middle row. Make sure you pin it together by matching seams first. So I'll just show you this. Obviously, I've only got a little mat here. You'll have yours all the way across your ironing board. So match the seam first. So take a pin and push a pin about 1/2 inch from the top, or an inch, about 1 inch to 1/2 inch, through the seam, and then make sure that goes right through the seam below, and then about 1/4 inch from the top, or a little less, push a pin through the seam, and then push that pin through the seam below. And now you can be sure those seams are matched up. Now pin together on the left-hand edge at the top, and then a little bit further down, and that just keeps everything straight. And then you can place pins either side of those placement pins and remove them. So push a pin through all the layers of fabric, either side of the pin, and then remove it. Now, because this is a bigger piece, I want everything to stay in place. So I'm just pushing the fabric so those seam through and pushing a pin through to hold them in place. That means I can pull the left-hand side to ease it into place. And because velvet is wonderfully forgiving, it doesn't stretch, but it has more ease than cotton. You can pull it so it fits beautifully. And if you've got any slight errors in your seam allowance, or if anything's slipped, when you're joining the blocks here together, as long as you're only pulling it very gently, it won't pucker, but it does ease nicely into shape. So take your time when you're joining all of these together to put plenty of pins in, and do one section at a time, just like I've done. Match the seam, pin between the seams, and then pin either side. And once that's done, sew it together, and then sew the bottom row below the middle row. And once you've done that, it will look like this. And this is your completed cushion front. So a beautiful star block for the cushion front. Now, if you want to quilt it, this is optional, but it does make it look a lot nicer. Put it centrally on top of your wadding. The wadding is listed in the instructions. Tack or spray baste it together, and then quilt it in whatever pattern you like. I've quilted along the lines, and then I quilted diagonal lines centrally from one side to the other, and then put a square in the centre, and then trim the wadding so it is level all the way round. And then you're ready to assemble. Making the cushion back. The cushion back is made from 2 pieces of velvet that are joined together with a zip in the centre. This is really easy to do. You just need to do it, follow the steps that I'm going to show you so that you get the zip in the right place, and I do lots of tacking to make sure that it all works. So take the upper back and the lower back and place them right sides facing. Obviously the top edge of the lower back needs to match up with the bottom edge of the upper back, and smooth the velvet to make sure that they're both facing the same way. It's important when you're doing the cushion back that the velvet faces smooths in the same direction. So place the 2 pieces right sides facing, now that you know they face in the same direction, and pin them together in the top corner. Obviously, you've now got 2 velvet pieces together, so you need to be a little bit more careful because one will roll, and it's not as easy as working with cotton, but we're going to use plenty of pins and that will overcome it. So pin them together in the top corner, and then a little bit further as down, and then that just keeps that edge nice and stable. And then once you've done that, pin them together all the way along the edge. So like we've done with the patchwork, push the point of the pin right into the edge, as close to the raw edge as you can get it, and that stops the velvet from moving and the bottom edge from rolling under. And then at this stage, put your pins in so they are vertical, because they will hold it better, and then pin between all the way along. Now once you've done that, it's all pinned in place. From the left hand edge, measure and mark 2 inches, and that's where you're going to stop stitching. So from the left there, 2 inches, and then on the right hand side, measure and mark 2 inches. So we're going to sew all the way along the edge, but we're going to sew a seam that's 2 inches in from the side and then tack between that seam. And it will look like this then. So you can see I've sewn 2 inches using a normal stitch length, and then between the 2 inch seams I've sewn using a tacking stitch, which is my longest stitch. Now we can put the zip into place. So place the joined cushion fabrics right sides down and place the zip on top. The zip is longer than is needed because it's a lot easier to work with a longer zip. So with a little bit of, make sure it's central first, and then the zip teeth need to lie exactly on top of the seam. So make sure the zip is closed, and don't worry about the zip being longer, that's fine. So pin the zip tape in place. Now you can see here, it does say in the instructions that when you sew those seams, you use a 1 inch seam allowance. And the reason for that is because with velvet, it's a lot easier to make sure that the zip tape is caught in the zip. So you can see why I've got such a big seam allowance, because using that 1 inch makes sure that the velvet stays under when you're sewing it in place, because it is a little bit bouncy. So just pin it into place all the way along both sides, and then it will look like this. So the zip teeth run exactly on the seam. You can see the zip is central, so you've got bits poking out each side. But we want to sew from the right side. So turn it over and we're going to repin it. And I know this seems like, oh, a bit of a waste because you've pinned from one side and now you're pinning from the other side. But honestly, this makes it a lot easier. So without taking out the pins from the other side, repin from the right side. Because obviously you can't sew from the right side if you've got all the pins on the wrong side. But if you sew from the wrong side, it doesn't look as neat. So this is why I do this. So turn it all over. And actually what you can do is put the pins between the other pins all the way around. So pin them all the way down one side. And make sure that when you pin them the direction you're going to be sewing, so they're a lot easier to take out. Don't worry about the zip slider at this stage or the ends of the zip tape sticking out. We'll sort that out in a moment. Put lots of pins in. I am placing these horizontally, and that's because the seam is already done, so that's fine. When you've done that, and you've pinned it all neatly all from the right side, turn it back over, and you can take out all the pins from the wrong side, and then that means you won't sew over them. I put less pins on the wrong side because they're more sort of holding, positioning pins, and on the right side where I'm going to be sewing, I put lots of pins. So although this takes 2 or 3 minutes longer by putting in double pinning, it is worth it because you'll get a neater finish, particularly when you're using velvet as well, when everything's got to be nice and straight. So you can see that seam allowance poking out beyond the edge of the zip tape, so you can be absolutely sure that will get caught in the zip when you're sewing. So now you can sew it into place, but firstly we've got to sort out the zip slider. So I'm just going to re-measure that 2 inch seam, because it's quite hard to see now where I stopped the seam and where I started tacking, because this is where the end of my sewing is going to be. So just pop the pin on that 2 inch mark and then do the same thing on the other end. Move the slide. We've need to move the slider out the way because otherwise it needs to be further in, otherwise it will be outside the seam. So if you just get hold of the slider, and if it's facing towards you like this, you can just push it all the way under. If you turn it around, it's easier. If you can't get it through, just remove a couple of pins and put them in. Now just push it down the zip tape. I push it just a few inches in from the end because that's all it needs to be. And then you know that the zip slider is then going to be within the seam. Because just like we did on the other end, mark that 2 inches, and that just marks the end of the short seam. All these details are in the instructions about stitch lengths and tacking, but this is just to show you how to do it. So that's going to be the end of, I guess, the zip rectangle. So now we're going to sew the zip into place using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So across the end where there's the pin, all the way along. You'll have to move the slider when you reach it, forwards and backwards, but that's easily done. Across the other end, all the way down, and then back over that end just to make it secure, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then it will look like this. So you can see I've sewn all the way round. I've got the ends of the zip tape sticking out beyond it, and then the zip slider is still inside. So yours cushion back should now look like this. Now you can undo the tacking stitches. Because you used the longest stitch length on your machine to do this, I used a number 5. These come out fairly easily. I'm using a stitch ripper for this. Just make sure that when you do it, don't cut the velvet when you do it, and remove all the loose threads. Once you've done that, it will look like this. So you can see now I've got a neatly inserted zip between my upper back and my lower back. It's nice and even. You can give it a little press. And then where you've got that excess zip tape, you can now trim this. So I trim it to about half an inch outside the seam, about that. Just what you don't want is for it to be sewn into the side seam when you sew the cushion front to the cushion back. So about an inch. And that's done. A very neatly inserted zip in your cushion back with a nice 2 colourway fitting and easy to do. Assembling the cushion cover. So take your cushion front, this is the one I've quilted mine, and your cushion back and place them right sides facing. Make sure the zip is open a little way on the cushion back or you won't be able to turn it right sides out later. Now I've designed this so that the cushion back is a little bit bigger than the cushion front. And the reason for this is, depending on what size zip you use, whether number 3, number 5, it can change things. If you also, your seam allowances aren't 100% correct, it's better if the cushion back is bigger than the cushion front, and then you can just trim it down. So what I do is I match up the raw edge on the top and one of the sides, pin it together, and then I can then trim the bottom and the left hand side to fit. Or you can place it centrally. I just find that if you make the cushion back a bit bigger, then you can be sure it fits. And particularly if I wasn't inserting a zip down the centre, I wouldn't do this, but it does allow for any irregularities when you're sewing in the zip. So match up the raw edges and either place it centrally or whatever, and then you can trim the cushion back to fit. Or you don't need to trim it, you can just leave it pinned. And then you can see here, I didn't trim it. I've sewn the front and the back right sides together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I didn't trim it because I could see what the 1/4 inch seam allowance is. And then I'll trim it afterwards. So you can see here, it's all pinned, lots and lots of pins all the way around the edge, just to make sure that the raw edge doesn't roll under. And then sew it together all the way around. And it will look like this. Now, it's up to you whether you trim that extra or not. You don't need to. It's quite a squishy cushion, and having the extra seam allowance inside doesn't really make much difference. So it's entirely up to you whether you trim it or not. Now you need to turn your cushion cover right sides out. Push out those corners with your fingers as you do it. It's easier if you do it there and then. You can trim the corners if you like, but actually I didn't trim mine. It's up to you. You can clip them or not. You'll get more rounded corners if you don't, and you'll get sharper corners if you do. In the instructions I say to clip them off, but when you do it, it's really entirely up to you whether you want that rounded look or the more right angled look, but push them out. Once you've done that, you can close the zip because we want to just give this a press before put the cushion pad inside. So roll the seams that are on the edge, roll them between your fingers so that they lay right on the edge, and then press them all the way round. Again, make sure the iron's not too hot because you will be pressing velvet. And then pop the cushion pad inside. Make sure that the corners of the cushion are sitting right inside. Close the zip, and your beautiful velvet Constellation cushion is now finished. It's really big and soft and squishy. It looks wonderful on an armchair. Make 1 or 2 of them, or put it on your bed. And if you've made the matching quilt, then you've got a gorgeous set that you should be really proud of.